So what are the best practices for delivering criticism and feedback to colleagues? Oh, you need to walk on ice right there. Now, I'm not suggesting you shouldn't give feedback or criticism to colleagues, but you do need to be profoundly careful because there are a lot of ways where you can help your colleague, help your relationship with your colleague, help yourself, and help the organization. So I in no way am suggesting you shouldn't give feedback or criticism, but you need to be careful because we are all human beings with egos, with emotions, and they are fragile. All of us, every one of us, there's no exception. So if someone asks you for constructive feedback for criticism, first of all, you should say thank you. Don't just say, oh, I don't know, I don't do that sort of thing. You need to, first of all, acknowledge them. But please make sure they're asking for feedback or constructive criticism. Now, if you are their boss, that's a separate issue. We'll deal with that in a moment. But the first thing you do want is, if it's a peer, a colleague, just someone else in your industry, make sure they want constructive feedback. A lot of people do not want constructive feedback. And it doesn't matter how good your advice is. It doesn't matter how accurate it is. It doesn't matter that, hey, I'm just being honest. None of that's going to matter. All you're going to do is alienate someone if you just give constructive feedback, typically, especially if there's even a hint of negativity. Now, if it's entirely positive, sure, no one's going to be offended by that, and it may be very helpful. Now, the thing you read in all the books and the simplistic information is do the donut. Give them one positive thing, a little bit of criticism, and end with something positive. And it's not that that's horrible advice. It just is a little too superficial. If you're giving someone feedback and critique and trying to help them, it's very important that you connect emotionally with them. They need to know before you even start that you're trying to help them. And the way to do that is by first asking a few more questions, asking, what is it you're trying to do? Where do you feel you're strong and weak? Where do you feel like you need the most feedback? Because if you just start critiquing someone's dress and they thought their clothes were great and they want critiquing of the message or their PowerPoint slides, there can be a huge disconnect. So do some probing with them and really figure out what are their insecurities. They may say, well, I just feel like I look nervous or uncomfortable when I stand up to speak, if they want feedback on their presentation, for example. Listen carefully, but here's a chance for you to bond with them a little more and let them know, hey, I remember my first speech. I stood up and all of a sudden my ear is sort of twitching and I'm feeling these weird things in my ear because I was nervous. If you share a little bit of vulnerability with your colleague, they're going to let their guard down. They're going to feel like you're a real person, you're trying to help them, and it's not intimidating. It opens them up to your feedback. Now, when you are giving constructive feedback, it does need to be constructive. It doesn't mean everything has to be positive. It doesn't mean you ignore horrible flaws and you just try to make them feel good. It's not actually constructive. If someone is giving, in my case, an awful speech, awful presentation, it doesn't help them to say, oh, you were great, you were fantastic, you were wonderful, everything was fantastic. That's not helping them. So you've got to give honest assessments, but you have to do it in a particular way. For starters, whether it's a speech, a presentation, a memo they're asking for feedback on, a PowerPoint slide deck, try to look at the whole thing. Look at what their overall objectives are. And for starters, even though it's cliched advice, it is true, start by telling them exactly what they are doing well. People think they benefit by saying, oh, rip me apart. Tell me what's wrong. Don't hold back. Be honest. I can take it. Everyone says that. They don't necessarily mean it. Or if they do mean it, it still doesn't have the impact you want. It creates an immediate defensive mode in most people. So the first thing you do is you want to isolate and enumerate what their strengths were. What did they do well? This isn't just to butter them up. It's not to make them feel good. It's not just to make them more receptive to your insights and later criticism, although it can do that. It's important because they literally do need to know what's working so they can do more of it and do it again. The problem a lot of people have, whether it's giving a speech or doing an analysis or writing a report, is they do something well one time, and then the next opportunity they have to do the same thing, they don't do it. They had this great strength and they forgot about it. So you do a tremendous positive service for a colleague, an executive, by reinforcing the things they do well. If you can help them do more of those good things, quite often that will crowd out any flaws they have. So, for example, if I'm critiquing someone on a presentation and I've seen their whole speech and I've seen them do 20 minutes of question and answer session, maybe the best part was their answer to a particular question when they launched into a specific story about how they helped a client who was very similar to the person asking the question. And I could see the person in the audience, their eyes lit up, their head was shaking, they really resonated. I can, in the feedback, say, wow, that story was great. Tell them exactly what the story was. Tell them the reaction from the person in the audience, because they might not have really noticed how positive the reaction was from the person in the audience. So reinforce that strength, reinforce that moment. They can use that to now perhaps put that story into the beginning of their presentation, or to use it more frequently. It might motivate them to illustrate their key points with stories on a more regular basis, which would dramatically improve their ability to communicate. So it's not just public relations. It's not just ego management to start off by telling somebody what they did well. It actually is profoundly important in boosting their performance so they can do more of it. You know, life is full of wildly successful people who do one thing. Now, Michael Phelps is athletic, but if he tried to get in the Olympics in a running race, a 100-meter dash, he wouldn't do well. He focused on one thing and did more of it and more of it. The more you can help any colleague you work with figure out what are they really doing well in this thing they're asking feedback on, so they can double down on it, do it more, put more of a spotlight on that. Typically, you will help them. Now, when it comes to criticism, we said constructive criticism. Criticism is in there. What is it they're doing that's hurting them? It's important to be strategic here, because the problem too often is someone just starts giving a long laundry list. Well, here are 89 things I didn't like about your presentation. It's overwhelming. It's depressing to hear that. It's too much information for people to process. And it kind of feels like, oh my God, how do I even start? It's hopeless. Let me just give up. Let me just walk off. Quit. You don't want that response from people. So in my case, when I am coaching someone on how to improve their presentation skills and giving constructive feedback, after I've isolated and enumerated their strengths, I typically focus on one thing where I think it's less than ideal, one thing I want them to do to improve it, and then we try to do it right away to improve it. Now, that doesn't work in every single skill someone might be asking for feedback on in the office. But the more you can focus on one thing that is less than ideal and then go right to a specific suggestion that you think is realistic for them to try to do, to implement, that's where you're most helpful. If you just say to someone, well, you're really coming across as young and inexperienced, that's a problem. And then you get to the next thing. and the person you're coaching is 23 and is relatively young and inexperienced compared to other people in your organization, and all you did is list that, well, what good is that? What are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to dye their hair gray, pull their hair out like mine? Are they supposed to paint wrinkles on? No. So that's not particularly useful. Now, if you want to say something to the effect of, you seem slightly tentative, which might make someone doubt your experience. So I would urge you to quickly give your case study about that huge success you had last month that demonstrates your experience. That would be helpful. It's okay to have some criticism, but you need to give people a specific path for improving. That's what is essential. And finally, it's not that you want to put a cherry on the top or make everyone lovey-dovey at the end and feel good, but it is helpful to let people know that, hey, once you correct this issue and you do this one thing, you have enough other strengths that when you put it all together, I think you're going to make a great impression, or you're really going to excel, or these good things can happen. Obviously, you don't want to predict, now you're going to be the CEO. But if you can paint a path for how their improvement can help them, it's going to make them feel better, number one. Number two, it's going to increase the likelihood that they follow your instructions, that they take your feedback seriously, and that you actually help them. And that is your ultimate goal. If you want to be more successful, then improve your communication skills. The best way to do that? Smash the subscribe button right now.